Hey there, and welcome back to SciBurst, a podcast about science, popular culture, and entertainment. We're your hosts, Ella
and Isabel, two science communication and sci-fi nerds steering this spaceship into the multiverse of science fun. Today's episode, farming simulators, agriculture narratives, paleontology, and nature retreat in farming video games.
Wow. But before that, let's hear some recommendations. And before we do that, it's super important to us that we recognise that this episode of SciBurst is being recorded on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present, emerging, and future. Indigenous Australians are the first scientists and artists. So what's your culture snap, Isabel?
Yeah, so this year I've actually been completing a 50-book reading challenge.
Whoa.
Yeah, I initially started out with 100, but then realized that it was way too ambitious. So I got it down to 50. And I actually want to encourage people to do this because I have learned a lot about myself. I have read books I would normally not read. It has gotten me to read like a variety of different styles and genres.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about the best one I've read so far.
Please, yes.
It's called Annihilation, and it's from the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer, and it was also adapted into a movie a couple years ago by Alex Garland, who's also an excellent director and did Ex Machina. If you know that film, it's really good. I'm just going off on tangents here.
No,
and I
go
have
for it.
so many recommendations. And it's got Natalie Portman in it too. It's fantastic. Anyway, the story follows a team of 4 women in STEM. So a biologist, a anthropologist, a psychologist, and a surveyor, who all set out into a mysterious, unexplained area called Area X, which is an ecologically devastated swampland in the southern part of the United States that has its own ecosystem different to the rest of Earth. And it's been closed off to the public. And anyway, the women, whose names are actually never revealed.
What?
Yeah.
In the entire book?
Yeah, so they're referred to as the biologist did this, or like the psychologist did this.
That's really interesting framing.
I don't think anybody is given a name at all in the book.
Kind of cool, but I do love a good named character.
Yeah, well, they're named in the movie for the purposes of the movie. Yeah. And anyway, the group of women make up the 12th expedition into the area because all the previous ones have failed due to disappearances or mass suicides or cancers or mental trauma. And this is the first time the expedition is made up of all women as well. So they're like, let's try this and see if it works.
Interesting.
And I don't want to say anything else because it's going to spoil it.
So you're just going to leave us there?
I'm just going to leave it there. Wow. Yeah. So what's your culture snap, Ella?
Mine is completely left of field, I think, in comparison to that.
I love this recommendation.
Maybe more related to, the fact that today we're going to be talking a bit about farming simulators and games. I really want to recommend baking.
Yes.
Specifically, I'm a huge baker. I love it to de-stress. I love sharing food with friends. I think it's so wholesome and fun. Specifically this week, I want to recommend baking with berries, which I've been doing a lot of recently. We're coming back into berry season in Australia, so by the time this is out, I think berries should be even cheaper, which we love.
Oh, yes.
We stan. I'm talking blueberries. I'm talking strawberries. I'm talking raspberries. I'm talking blackberries.
Yum, yum.
Love, love, love. My 2 favorites at the moment are blueberry pancakes.
Yes. I love blueberry pancakes.
Like fresh, like make your pancakes,
Yep.
drop the bloobs into them.
Yep.
Maybe some dark chalky chips if you're feeling it.
Oh,
Really good.
I haven't tried that. Need to try that.
If you are listening to this and you're about to make breakfast, I recommend that you jump on that. My other berry baking recipe you can do if you're like, Ella, I'm not really in a breakfast mood. Get into berry muffins. Again, you could do blueberries. Blueberry muffins, always a hit. Blueberry muffins with like a cinnamon brown sugar crumble on top. A big win with everyone. Or white chocolate raspberry. muffins.
Oh my gosh, that is one of my favorite combinations.
And I'm sorry for making you all hungry at the start of this podcast, but I'm also not sorry because maybe it'll motivate us. I don't know. I'd like to go make some more muffins. Maybe that's what I'll do after this episode.
Sounds like a great idea. And you know what else has berries in it?
What else has berries in it?
Minecraft.
Was that a segue?
Was that a segue? Yes, indeed it was. So Minecraft is the best-selling video game of all time.
Of all time. How many copies has it sold?
Almost 240 million.
That is a lot of copies.
That is a lot of copies. And the next most sold one...
video game.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is, but it's like 30 million less copies sold.
Whoa.
Yeah, and you know, the thing about Minecraft is it can be a farming simulator.
Hey, is that the topic of today's podcast episode?
I think it is, Ella. So farming simulators are clearly a popular thing.
Especially right now.
And even if it's not the main function of the game, it's part of the game mechanics of a lot of other video games.
Yeah, like right before we were recording this, bumped into some friends at good old CPAS, all here on a Sunday doing their PhD study.
Finishing their PhD studies.
Talking to us about all the different horror games that use farming simulation as like a part of the game mechanic, like not even a mini game kind of functionality, but rooted in the main story.
Usually like a horror or some kind of survival game. So I'll give some examples.
Yeah, please.
Don't Starve Together.
The one that traumatized you?
The one that I have trauma from. The Forest.
Rust. Valheim.
Yep. And also Ooblets just came out.
By the time this episode comes out, the Ooblets will have dropped on Switch. And I am so excited for this game. I've had like a pin from it for like over 2 years. I've not played this game. I've got it on pre-order. I'm so excited. It's like a farming simulator meets like almost like little Pokemon kind of little friends who dance. You have dance battles.
Yeah, the feel of it seems like it's a mixture of Pokemon and Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing? Is that another?
That's another farming simulator we're going to talk about
Which is insanely popular too, right? Mm-hmm. And there are just all these examples. We've even got classic the farming simulator game where you simulate driving a tractor.
No, it's literally called Farming Simulator.
Maybe not the most interesting of the farming simulator games, but a good one to mention.
Yeah. So clearly there's a lot of them. They're popular.
People like them. People play them.
Right. But what are they actually? I feel like we should explain them to people who might not know what a farming simulator game is. Yeah. So they're basically more of an experiential type video game where you pretty much become a farmer. And you can grow crops, build gardens, take care of animals and land. And usually there's no way of quote unquote winning or a specific end goal, and it's what you make of it.
Kind of like life.
Yeah. And I just wanted to have a side note here. I don't mean grinding, which is sometimes interchanged with farming in video games, which is that repetitive action over and over again in search of an item or to like gain experience points to level up. That is not what I mean. I mean farming simulator games. Okay, awesome. So why Ella, do you think we keep making farming sims, and why are we talking about them in this episode?
Yeah, so there are so many reasons I think why we keep making farming sims. And some of the discussions I've had with friends have been about because as a game mechanic, it's actually really reliable. And a really good base to grow from. There's a lot you can do with the patterns of agriculture, planting a crop, watching it grow. It's something tangible that we all kind of understand because it relates so clearly to human life, even if you don't have plants yourself, but like we all eat food and like that that comes, and we understand the life cycle, you know, even from primary school, sometimes in kindergarten before you go to school. I think it's a really easy way for, like, we see kind of like this rise of what is called cozy games coming, which can kind of be defined as, or I like to think of them as kind of like non-stressful games where time isn't a factor. Maybe you don't have to be a very skilled gamer. I'm a very casual gamer myself, so it's kind of things you can jump in and out of quickly, play a little bit of, and then go away, and it's not going to impact your, I don't know, stats in a game. Or
sometimes they make you feel bad for leaving for so long, though, like in Animal Crossing.
Yeah, they'll be like, we didn't see you. But it doesn't really impact your gameplay or much of your gaming experience. It's just, you can kind of take them at your own pace, which is really nice, and kind of in stark contrast to a lot of other different games. And that's why we see kind of people who maybe play more competitive games or first-person shooters or similar, taking a step back or like having this as like a break.
Yeah, because it's so totally different to most of the games they play. And so many games at the moment are also shooters or like action adventure. Yeah. It's quite a different style.
Different style, change of pace. Yeah, a really good mix. But why are we talking about it, I guess, in this podcast? Because this is a science and popular culture podcast. And so far, there's a lot of popular culture.
Yep.
There's a really, really interesting kind of field being explored, or like subfield of gamification of science. And I think we're going to touch on it a lot throughout this podcast of how games and their mechanics can feed into not only gamification of, you know, science thinking and literacy, but also our understandings of agriculture and biology.
Absolutely.
And paleontology.
Absolutely.
We found a really, really interesting paper that we're going to link to in one of our social media posts afterwards, so you guys can all read it too. And the paper kind of like outlines a rationale for why these authors believe that video games have potential to be exploited.
There's your word again.
That's my word. To be exploited for gain in science education. And that video games are a sort of cultural tool, and a really interactive and engaging cultural tool, which I think is a super important thing to know about the method of games, is that relationship they can have to one person specifically, where you are engaging with them on such an individual and motivating level. So video games can be used as a cultural tool to support scientific literacy in terms of your knowledge and like the content base of that, to explore that. It can help you understand skills and processes. Yeah. And also the nature of science more generally. So there's lots of different ways that games and gamification of science can play into our own personal understandings and knowledge bases of science.
Yeah, and I quickly want to say that farming simulators as a form of gamification are, most farming simulators are not photorealistic.
No.
They have a like retro animation type of cartoony style.
They're like super stylized and aesthetic as well.
And the really interesting thing about that style of computer game is that from research, they found that that cartoon-based game is more effective than photorealistic games in facilitating learning.
Which is super interesting, right? Because I'd kind of expect it to be the opposite.
Me too.
Of what you see is what you get. I'd much rather, or I would think, you know, seeing photorealistic crops sprouting is what people want. But I guess it's kind of almost that abstracted level of you make connections on this maybe game base that you can apply to real life rather than being the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So that's why Farming Simulator, I guess, maybe isn't as much of an engaging game, because it's...
Good point, actually.
It's taking exactly what someone's job could be of driving a tractor and just putting it into a game, rather than using all the benefits of a game, which is, you know, the ways it can be unrealistic and the ways that you can feed in things that maybe in real life don't 100% feed into it, but you can make that a game mechanic.
Yeah. Like Minecraft, for example.
Minecraft?
So I really want to start by talking about Minecraft, because it is the best-selling video game. First search return in Google when you look up most popular video game. And yes, it's a sandbox game, which means it's pretty much limitless in what you can do with it. but it can also be a farming simulator if that's how you want to use it.
Yeah, it's just one of the ways you can enjoy it.
Yeah. And I'm realizing now that Minecraft probably deserves its own episode in this podcast.
Is this a future episode tease?
This might be a future episode tease. Since Ella got to talk about Pokemon, I get to talk about Minecraft.
I love it. I'm so here for this.
Because I'm pretty sure that is probably the game that I have the most hours on.
Good for you. Get it.
So one of the things Minecraft does is that it introduces people to participatory planning.
What's that?
Designing.
Okay.
So that can include like agricultural design. So it enables players to easily design using blocks to build and modify structures like lakes and vegetation and so on. So that's one thing. But the crop farming in Minecraft is actually also quite particular.
Yeah.
I did a quick Google search and there are some very long Minecraft wiki pages just dedicated to farming in Minecraft. And so I'll give an example of the particularities. So the seeds, for instance, won't grow unless they are on tilled soil and next to water.
So you're going to meet all these kind of conditions.
Yes, exactly. And even to till the soil, you'll need a particular tool that you need to craft for it. And you can also accidentally trample the dirt and ruin the farm.
No.
So you actually need to actively create ways of protecting the farm using fences or blocks or whatever it is. And I'm not actually sure if that's the case in other farming simulators like Stardew Valley or...
Yeah, it's not really the case in Animal Crossing. Like, I guess if you run across the flowers, you can destroy them. So you'd be just setting barriers for you rather than for other things roaming in the wild, I guess.
I just thought that was a little interesting way of encouraging like protection of crops in the environment.
Yeah, so you're not just thinking about the farming, but like other elements that go into it.
Exactly. Plus the crops only grow during the day when there's light, unless you use torches, which doesn't make sense. But
it gets people thinking about what are the essential elements.
What do you need for farming? Yeah.
Yeah, like what do plants need for photosynthesis to occur, to like have food? You need a light source. And if that light source happens to be a torch, which makes players think about needing a light source, I still think that's a really valuable element. Yeah,
right. Oh my gosh, and I forgot, like mushrooms you can grow underground as well in like dark spots.
That's so cute.
Yeah.
I love it.
So there's like very particular ways of creating farms. Also bone meal you can use, which accelerates growth, and it's pretty much the equivalent of a composter because you create it using unwanted materials like
amazing
bones. Yeah. And overall with farms, you can make them they become a renewable source of food for you as a player. If you're playing on survival mode, you need to stay alive, and that is how you stay alive by farming, and used for game progression or animal breeding.
Ooh,
so that's kind of sick.
Yeah, very much kind of that holistic agriculture, not just horticultural.
Exactly.
Yeah, experience.
Yeah. Something else is you can also build automatic farms or semi-automatic farms through this element in the game called redstone, which lets you be an engineer essentially, and you can do create these little circuits and mechanisms that will like farm for you, like collect the crops and take care of it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it's also encouraging engineering.
Yeah.
And also one last thing I want to say is that there's a version of Minecraft that started around 2021, I think, called Farmcraft, which is a tweaked version specifically made for engaging and teaching students about modern farming and its impacts on the environment.
Oh, just casually.
Just
the coolest
casually.
thing ever.
Yeah, I think it was in collaboration with John Deere. So
wow.
yeah, and so also created to inspire youth to pursue university degrees and careers in agriculture.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's pretty much made up of missions, farming missions like growing and planting and harvesting crops and replanting crops as well.
Yeah, so it touches on quite a few different areas of STEM, right?
So many, which is why I'm like, it's its own episode. And I just then had to contain it to agriculture.
Yeah, I can see you've got quite tight notes on this. But so we've already covered environmental conservation,
Yep.
Engineering, agriculture, which I think is often an underappreciated area of STEM, is the amount of science that goes into, growing crops and even caring after animals.
It's one of those ones that draws from other fields of STEM, like, so, engineering, biology, chemistry.
Everyone knows, like that kind of comes to mind when you think of STEM, but how often is it like an image of a farmer? Like that is quite a specific type of scientific intelligence that I think, we should acknowledge more. And I think these games hit on quite well, and maybe that's one of the elements of how it can bring in so many players, is that it's kind of like surprise science. You're a scientist.
I love that though.
Yeah, it's really cool. So Minecraft, right?
Yeah.
Number 1 selling video game of all time.
Yeah.
Really cool. I wouldn't say a rival to it, but a game that, especially during lockdown and COVID
100%
took up so much of people's time, maybe away from Minecraft, maybe in addition to, who can say, is Animal Crossing, which was scheduled for release.
Amazing.
Almost at the same time that everyone into lockdown, and it kind of became almost synonymous with my, like, what I think about when I think of lockdown is like not being able to leave my house, and playing Animal Crossing, and being isolated, but having that kind of world to escape into. And it was huge culturally, I think, especially for people in our age range.
Yeah, and probably, people who have never played Animal Crossing before, but they were like, oh, this like game is coming out and this could offer me a way of escaping the current like pandemic.
It kind of became the thing to do.
Yeah.
And I really want to talk about it.
Yes.
And I'm going to go into a whole bunch of, how it feeds into science in a second, but I want to talk about first about how we, kind of saw that as a way to be in an outside and social world at a time that we couldn't really. And kind of bringing this idea of the outside and the natural indoors with us in a simulated environment. Because I think that was a huge reason as to why it was so popular. Like, yes, you can engage with your friends online. It's, more realistic to life because its time mimics the time zone that you're in. And it's minute by minute, unlike, maybe Stardew Valley, which time moves at a different pace to you in the real world. But in Animal Crossing, everything's okay. There's no COVID. You're on a nice little island trying to pay back like a capitalist raccoon. You can pick your own furniture. You can leave your house. You can go on adventures. You can catch fish.
You were surrounded by animals.
Yeah, I think when you have to be trapped indoors, it's kind of like the ideal is the world and the escapism that Animal Crossing provides for you.
Yeah.
This wasn't the first Animal Crossing game. I think it's maybe in its 4th variation or something.
I have no idea. There's been a few.
But I think this is the biggest one. I think especially because of the time that it came out in. So let's talk about how it relates to science and some scientific concepts.
Yes, tell me, Ella.
Let me tell you about the conservation messaging within Animal Crossing, which I think is often underappreciated, or again, kind of like sneaks in secretly and you don't realize how cool the mechanic is that you're engaging with. So within the world of Animal Crossing, within the game, you can dig up fossils, you can catch bugs and fish, and you can take them to the museum. You're on a desert island. It has no houses when you first get there. But it has a museum. You put up a museum. It starts out as a little tent and then it becomes...
No houses, but there's a museum and a store, ?
Yeah. And you set up a tent. It becomes a museum. And you take these little findings that you have, which are fossils or bugs or fish, to the museum. And you get them identified so you understand what type of fish or bug or fossil it is. And then you can donate what you found
Yes.
to the museum and populate the museum with kind of like your own discoveries, which is really, really cool. And then they're on display for the whole little village to see that you make on this island, but also for your friends if you play socially and online to come see too, kind of like bragging points as to who can finish their museum first.
That is very much the case.
But what we see in this game mechanic is actually a lot of conservation messaging. So we've got the digging up of fossils, how that relates to, paleontology, identifying of fish and bug species. Those are two completely different scientific disciplines in their own right, and yet you are doing all of them at once as just someone who lives on an island.
Yes.
Yeah, you're specializing in many different areas, and every character is capable of this.
Yeah.
And it's also through a collaborative system where you do the discoveries and you take them to somebody else to help you identify them. I think that's a really cool thing to replicate.
Hello, citizen science.
Citizen science in my game?
Ooh.
It's more likely than you think. Other ways the game, kind of hijacks your brain for some more slight conservation messaging is by making you really aware of what's on your island. So in Animal Crossing, you want your island to be pretty. You want it to be decorated well. You don't want there to be lots of clutter and trash, quote unquote. Trash is things that maybe you've dropped. So maybe you don't have enough space for like all your cool things in your house. But if you drop items instead of place them, it gets counted as trash. And the game actually says, hey, your island's a bit messy. Clean that up.
Hey, you're littering. Excuse me.
Yeah, and at times this litter can also include leaf litter. So the game mechanics promote you to go around and pick up and clean up your island, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, I remember spending so much time weeding as well, pulling out all the weeds.
Because if you don't, they replicate and you get more
yes,
weeds.
they just keep coming back. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's really kind of rewarding you for interacting and paying attention to your natural environment. And it does this through another mechanic too, where even leaf litter, even weeds, shells you find on the beach.
Yeah.
You can take all of these and craft with them. So it's kind of like recycling and repurposing natural items to be useful. And I think also plays really well into that sustainable conservation messaging, because if you cut a tree too many times to get wood, your tree falls down, you can't get any more wood from it. But if you take a little bit each day, you're going to be fine. And that's, really promoting sustainable ideals.
Yeah.
As a game mechanic that I don't even think I thought about until we started trying to think about it.
Yeah. So actually, now that you mention that game Don't Starve Together, which I briefly mentioned.
The horror survival.
Yeah. It has a mechanic in it where if you chop down too much wood, then the tree will turn into this like monster tree and start attacking you. So you actually need to be careful about how much you're taking.
Good for the tree. Good for the tree.
Get it, tree.
Get it, tree. If someone's attacking you and you're a tree, just turn into a monster and eat them. This is my hot tip for the week.
Did you want to talk about the flower breeding mechanic? This is interesting. That.
So another funky fresh thing in Animal Crossing is you can buy flower seeds and grow your own flowers and make your island pretty in that way. But if you set them up in a certain way, potentially one that represents or replicates kind of a Punnett square situation, you can do crossbreeding of flowers. So this is the game stepping firmly into the world of biology and plant genetics to say if you cross a red and a white flower, you can get a different, like a pink flower. And if you cross a yellow and red, you can get an orange flower. And you do that through planting them close enough and watering them and hoping that over time and over days, you will cross-pollinate a new breed, so a new species of flower that will produce a certain type of color. Yeah. And it became kind of another like status symbol of brag to your friends.
It for sure did as well.
If you could grow all the different flower types, especially blue flowers and especially golden ones, which you can only reach if your island is also free of trash and, perfectly beautiful and stunning.
Oh my gosh, is that really true? You can only get it unless
if you've got a 5-star island.
Oh, I see. Yeah, see, I didn't play it for too long, so I didn't know.
Unrelatable. Yeah, so I think that's really, really cool, the way that the game is promoting not only visible genetics, which is, being able to cross red and yellow and getting an orange flower, but these, colloquially they're referred to as hybrid flowers. So you can't buy them in game. You can only get them from breeding them yourself or from a friend gifting you one. Is that they also had to reach certain colorations, particularly blue, you had to make sure you had a hybrid yellow flower.
Oh my
which
gosh.
is a yellow flower that is the result of not pure yellow parent flowers.
I see. Wow. So they've actually put a lot of thought.
They put a lot of thought into it because invisible genetics that you couldn't see as a player contributed to things you can see as a player.
Damn.
So there are like whole articles on how to correctly and hopefully get to blue flowers in the shortest amount of time, because it also takes days. Like you can't just instantly put flowers next to each other. Like you have to water them and some time has to pass. And
Wow.
yeah, like this was well thought out.
Yeah.
And this is just one little element.
This is just one thing. And, so clearly the game developers have put a lot of thought into the science aspects of this game.
Yeah.
The flowers and Punnett squares is just one way. Another way is in paleontology.
Okay, tell me more. I'm super excited.
Oh, I'm super excited to talk about this. So like Ella said, you can dig up fossils from the ground. I don't know there's like a limit, I think, to how many you can dig up.
I think they
in a
give
day
you
or something.
three a day that you can dig.
Yeah, right. And you can take them to the museum to an expert to get them assessed, and he will tell you, oh, this is this type of dinosaur.
The expert is an owl. It's important to me. You all know that.
I love blathers. And I found this YouTube video of paleontologists playing Animal Crossing during the pandemic. And so they do a walkthrough of the museum, and they were actually very impressed with the detail and the accuracy of not only the groupings of the dinosaurs, but also how they're displayed, but also the bone structures,
the diversity of
the diversity.
Yeah, different dinosaurs.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. And the other interesting thing is when you find a fossil, there's a few different things you can do with it.
And we had a big old conversation about this the other day because we didn't realize how many different things you can do with it really and what the game encourages you to do.
Yeah. So the three main ways are you can keep it. Well, so after you've gotten it assessed by an expert, you can keep it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can donate it to the museum, or you can sell it to Tom Nook, the tycoon trillionaire that we all know and love from Animal Crossing.
The perpetuator of capitalism within my tiny island ecosystem. Thank you for keeping it real, Tom Nook. I will never pay you back.
And so it actually makes you feel bad for selling it.
Yeah, because you know that you could use it to further
the museum
knowledge.
Because when you get it assessed, Blathers tells you if they have it in the museum or not. So he's like, oh, we don't have this one. Would you like to donate it?
And it's always a secondary choice. You get it assessed. It never assumes you want to give it. You have to say yes or no every single time.
And then he's always sad when you say no.
Yeah. And the other one is if you don't sell it, you can keep it in your house. But imagine having a fully stocked kind of museum in your house, knowing the museum is empty.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the game, really rewards you for furthering everyone's experience, not just your own.
Yeah.
Which I really like, and I think is true to the values that science is built on.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure. And the other thing about the paleontology aspect of Animal Crossing, similar to Jurassic Park, has actually inspired people to pursue paleontology.
Animal Crossing has.
Animal Crossing has.
That's sensational.
Yeah. And we had a bit of a discussion about this a few days ago too, how it actually provides an update on the cultural image of a paleontologist. That's
love.
different to Jurassic Park, because Jurassic Park is definitely the stereotyped explorer safari look of a paleontologist who's like, ooh, sick dinosaur, and like they're obsessed.
Yeah, it's
with the
still an
dinosaurs.
archetype.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas in this, well, first of all, it's you who's doing it.
And you know it's a representation of you because you get to control what you look like on a day-to-day given basis.
Exactly. That's the thing. You get to control your outfits, and you can dig up the fossil in a dress if you want to.
Yeah. You
and
could
blue hair.
dig it up in like a t-shirt that says, I love dinosaurs. Like it doesn't matter, but it does matter, I think, that it can be anyone. And it can look like anyone. Even in the cartoon world of Animal Crossing, the fact that it can look like anyone and that's our cultural image update.
Yes.
That's really, really cool.
Awesome. I love updates on stereotypes of scientists.
Yeah, makes the world a little bit better.
Yeah.
So Animal Crossing, that's a really, really big farming simulator right now. But one I think that has died down a little bit since the end of particularly Australian lockdowns. That's, you know, my own lived experience that I'm going with, and the lived experience of a lot of my friends, is that we kind of all stopped playing as we were able to go back outside. And as life got better and playing Animal Crossing reminded you of when maybe life was a little bit not as good.
Actually, that's probably why I stopped playing. Yeah, that's probably part of the reason.
I don't like going back to it anymore because it kind of reminds me of like not being able to have like a choice in when I could go outside.
Yeah. Oh, I reckon people will go back to it again when the next one comes out, whenever that is.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're working on another one.
I mean, you'd be silly not to after how much success it was.
True.
But another farming simulator that's had really big success, I think, before Animal Crossing came out.
Yeah.
Maybe less so during it, but everyone was kind of getting into that farming simulator kind of vibe and is still going now at a rate that I don't think Animal Crossing is being played at.
Yeah.
Is Stardew Valley.
Yes. Stardew Valley, which is actually based off Harvest Moon, which is an even older.
Which is one of the original farming simulator games.
Yeah. Yeah. So, confession about Stardew Valley.
Tell me.
I haven't played this game.
Sacrilegious.
You've played it a little bit, right?
I played it a little bit. My best friend was really into it. I didn't like it that much. I was really into Animal Crossing and that had me hooked.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to have a better idea of Stardew Valley than me. But I'm
still going to let you explain it.
But I have watched gameplay. So I have a general idea of what's going on in this game. So it's an indie farming simulator where you give up an urban desk job to go and revitalize the family farm, because I think something happens to your like grandfather or something like that.
We love the storytelling immersion.
Yeah. Again, lots of freedom. You can complete quests at your own pace, or you can just explore the world if you don't even want to do that.
Yeah, you can just ignore quests, right?
Yeah.
Sick. I love open world games.
And as you progress, you become embedded in the local community, which is called Pelican Town.
Such a cute name. I think that feeds into the aesthetic too.
For sure. Where you can farm, forage, fish, mine to improve the farm and make friends. And if you choose, either restore the community center or purchase membership at Joja Mart, which is the big box corporate superstore.
Okay, so one of these is feeling very like cutesy, wholesome, love my town, love my community, love my place. And one of these is feeling a little bit capitalistic.
That's very much the case.
Just like a little bit on the nose, really.
Yes. Yeah, so I found an article which described the game as pitched as a playground for agricultural production and rural exploration with a retro vibe.
Ooh.
And a fun fact, this came from an agricultural journal.
Like a peer-reviewed journal.
Yeah.
Based in agriculture.
Yes.
Was talking specifically about Stardew Valley.
About this game.
I love that.
Yeah. And so this article is focused on how Stardew Valley affects agricultural narratives and the image of farmers.
Tell me about that. That's super interesting.
Yeah, so the main finding was that Stardew Valley reinforces classical idyllic agrarian beliefs where agriculture is not seen as an occupation but a wholesome lifestyle.
Whoa.
And its entire purpose is to sustain communities in addition to fields and pastures. So farmers are seen as basically the bedrock of society, which I think is interesting. and that all of the local businesses exist to serve the farmer.
Oh, that's a very world revolves around you kind of ideology.
Yeah. And so I give an example in the game, Stardew Valley, the local residents are never seen using the blacksmith or the carpenter or the fishing hut, and they can be found shopping or at the library, but there's never a queue. And it also rewards you for your hard work and grinding to sustain the farm.
Yeah, I guess the game is set up for you as the player, so it does make sense.
Yeah. So it is a very idyllic view of farming and agriculture. But the author of this paper argues that it also reduces the social consciousness of contemporary farming practices and perhaps its environmental impacts.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
Yeah. So it's like good in one way, but then there's also a flip side to that where it's, when you start thinking about industrialized agriculture and
it's not, this world doesn't fully give in to all those complexities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the author also goes on to talk about how the creator of Stardew Valley did spend a bit of his childhood playing near a rural wetland, but he's also what the author calls part of the desk chair countryside.
What a phrase.
Which, I think is a really interesting phrase because I'm probably part of the desk chair countryside as well, which is a group of people who primarily experience farming and agriculture and rural life through computer screens.
Yeah, which I think is super interesting as someone who, one of my only escapes like from my house in COVID, other than escapism in Animal Crossing, was like going to feed my sheep and take care of my lambs.
Yeah.
But that is I think that is one area that I have a lot of experience in. But I think in every other area, like especially like plant genetics, I'm definitely a desk chair countryside player. So it's super interesting seeing that phrase and seeing it articulated like that.
Yeah. And so it results in this idyllic, perfect view of agriculture and, like I said, less awareness perhaps of the industrialized agriculture. So it's desensitizing people to current social and environmental justice issues related to agriculture.
Yeah, because it's just presenting one view. But I guess that's also why we like it, right? It's like a simplified, gamified version of this really, really complex system that is integral to society.
Yeah. Yeah. But I will say, someone else argues that Stardew Valley reconnects people to nature and ecology through its environmental ambience audio. Love. This is super interesting. And I'm upset because I couldn't read the full, it's a chapter in a book and I don't have access to it, which means I can't give other people access to it either.
At ANU, please update. Please update our access to these cool things.
It's from a book that is all about like music in video games.
We're going to have to buy that book.
I'm going to have to, it was like $70 or something, which is
we're going to have to request that our library buys that book.
So in this chapter, I know from the summary that they talk about how music and environmental sounds in the game model ecological principles and facilitate playful interaction with the materiality of nature. So I don't have an example, unfortunately, because I couldn't read the chapter, but I went and listened to some Stardew Valley music.
Beautiful. Love it.
Like an autumn forest one. And it's gorgeous.
Stunning.
Because it is very much like you can hear the sounds of the trees moving and the water flowing and the like birds chirping and moving around.
Wow.
So I get it. It makes sense. And this is, it apparently plays an important role in the game as well, the listening action, but it's not explicitly stated in the directions of the game, which is interesting too.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
I love this idea of, reconnection to nature and ecology. through audio, through playing video games. In thinking about this topic, I've been thinking about concepts of bringing the outside in.
Yeah.
So bringing nature onto a screen where you can enjoy it maybe when you can't enjoy nature, or just like another way to kind of like cement it in your life. I think similar to the idea of houseplants and how they recently had a revival. I think this is kind of the video version of that is through video games. I wanted to talk about this really, really cute thing that my friends did. And these are my big Stardew Valley friends who love playing the game, is that they got inspired by some of the recipes you can bake as a mechanic within Stardew Valley.
I love that.
They got so inspired that they caught up specifically with the purpose of recreating some of these beautiful looking little pixelated stylized dishes from the game. They caught up to make those together. And I think that's such a cute, a beautiful connection, and maybe a reconnection of people to food. And you're thinking about where the food comes from because it's directly in relation to an agricultural-based game.
Exactly.
I just think that's so, so lovely.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's on kind of like a food level. There are also academic papers that talk about the concept of bringing the outside in.
Ooh.
And I found one that's an ecology paper, and it's talking about ownership and making personal connections in a classroom environment. With the outside world, specifically with like a forest kind of scenario, and with a horticultural kind of scenario where different people in the classroom each kind of picked a plant, and it's like a adopt a plant scenario where it's just that's your plant to look at and to understand and then share with people the information you found about it.
Yeah.
And because you're bringing that knowledge of the outside world into your classroom, but through a personal lens, people care about it more. And then when this classroom goes for like walks outside, they're like, oh, this is so-and-so's plant. Because they then have that extra layer of
more of a connection.
Understanding, and the connection grows.
Yeah.
And though this paper doesn't directly talk about gamification, I think the two are really well linked. And I think it comes down to that level of engagement, is that this is an activity that's set up to engage with people.
Yes.
And video games inherently engage with people in a story-driven mode. And I think the two are so compatible that I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, so cool.
Amazing.
And I think it's really interesting to see education and educational activities take that direction of engagement.
Yes.
Because I think it's those novel ways of engaging that are super, super interesting. They break the mold. They let us do something new and exciting that makes a lot of neural connections, a lot of pathways, a lot of knowledge.
Oh, we're talking about neurons now.
Talking about neurons. Talking about the physical structures of your brain that are part of your memory making. Yeah. Processes. And the more ways you can connect neurons together, the stronger those connections are, which is why if you connect a tree not only to, or the information about a tree to a picture of the tree plus a living version of the tree plus the fact that your friends knew about that tree, that's lots of different ways to cement the learning in your brain. Yeah.
And kind of like what you said before, it's helping make farming and agriculture visible as well. Like,
for sure.
Now you know where the food is coming from.
Yeah, now you're thinking about it because
you're thinking about it too.
It relates to the food that you see on the supermarket shelves in a way it didn't before, because you have that other layer of context.
Yeah.
I love every now and then just reminding myself that memories are physical, and your knowledge pathways are physical. That's what your brain is. I think, that's something that I don't think about enough that I'd like to think about more.
That is not something I've thought about before. But that is an interesting way of thinking about memories.
Would you like to have an existential crisis?
Maybe after this podcast recording.
Sorry to anyone who also hasn't thought about that. I thought that was normal. Anyway. Talking about new and novel ways of engaging with things, I want to talk about the game Flower.
Yes.
So this is a game by That Game Company. It's such a good name. All one word, That Game Company. They made Journey, Sky, Flow, I think, which is kind of like a cell version. But Flower is a game who the mechanics are so novel and the way of exploring the world is so new that I'd never experienced it before.
Yeah. And I said to Ella last week too that I think I encountered this game at a gaming exhibition, which is about the evolution of video games. And this was like the last one that you played.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
So I worked a game exhibition called Game Masters.
This is a different exhibition to the one I went to, by the way.
So the fact that it's been in 2 different game exhibitions is huge. But I played it at this game exhibition. It was in kind of like our movers and shakers, like games that had high impact. So it was in the same room as Minecraft, which I think is another really interesting connection to bring in.
Yeah.
But the kind of the way of playing flower is you start off as a singular flower petal, and through the controller you guide this flower petal through an environment to collect more flower petals, to interact with the environment, to kind of like go on a journey through the environment to get to the end of a track and join up and make other flowers bloom. And it's gorgeous and it's beautiful and it's one of the most emotional connections I've had to a video game playthrough. Like, it's so intuitive and yet beautiful, and it grips you.
Yeah.
And it makes you really, really aware of 2 things, which is the natural world, because that's the perspective that you see it from, your flower petal, but also any environmental changes. So sometimes as a flower petal, you're zooming around power lines that have fallen down, or there's like an electrical storm. And on that scale, you really feel it, and it kind of sits in your chest, and it's gorgeous. And I think from an environmental perspective, it makes us emotionally motivated and connected. And that's so cool as to how games can impact us.
Yeah. It's like now you're no longer part of nature. You are nature.
Yeah. And I think that's a disconnect sometimes as humans we think we have, is that we're not part of nature. And I wanted to bring this back to the concept of nature in literature and the concepts of nature and retreat in literature.
Yes, tell me more.
So I did this course last year at ANU. I also have an English major, English literature, and this is maybe one of my favorite ever literature courses. It's on American literature and the concepts and themes of nature and retreat. And one of the authors that we spent a lot of time with is Emerson, who wrote a book-length essay called Nature. And I also found this great paper talking about his essay and this concept of the biological sublime.
Oh my gosh, yes. I love this.
This is a phrase that I think links so well to the game Flower. This paper kind of says that the biological sublime can be thought of as the moments when we realize that our bodies are finite and that natural processes go on whether we like it or not. And more importantly, they continue whether we like it or not. So I think this is huge.
Yeah.
This is huge. And sorry about the existential crises, but our place in nature and the fact that this also relates to ideas of potential. And this is the course where I became obsessed with the idea of potential, because that's where that reading came from. Is that things are constantly in a flow state between life and death, and things are finite, and that's why nature is beautiful and lovely, and why we want to connect with it is because it is us. We are nature. And this paper goes on to say that it concludes really that as a statement of the biological sublime, Emerson's essays Nature is a challenge to cope with both the glories and the terrors of the human body.
Wow.
Within nature.
We just got real deep for a second.
We're just getting really, really deep for a hot second, because I think on one level, games make it really easy to connect on a surface level, but it's the emotional capacity that I think the concept of the biological sublime and Emerson really hit on.
Right, and which is something that the game Flower seems to tap into.
Yeah, particularly I think. Emerson's work is beautiful. It's long. If you want to read it, you can find it online for free. It's no longer in copyright. So yeah, you can find annotated versions. It's really gorgeous, but there's a few quotes I wanted to pull out, which I think connect really well to these ideas of bringing the outside in, why we love farming simulators, why we love nature, how it applies to all of us. The first is kind of from the first kind of parts of this essay, is a quote that says, "I am not solitary whilst I read and write, though nobody is with me." So
Oofed.
this is a concept. I know it's about reading and writing.
That's beautiful.
But I think it applies to games too, is that while you're doing these things that can be social on your own, you are not alone, even though there's nobody around you, because it is a way for connection to happen.
Yeah.
A way for human connection to happen. And Emerson kind of argues that being in nature is how you can be alone. Because it's not human connection, but it is still a fulfilling connection. I mean, you can be solitary in nature. And in that way, I think video games, particularly farming simulators, have the best of both worlds.
Yes.
You can be solitary and not solitary at the same time. All throughout, this beautiful novel experience of nature and socialization. And that very, very deep human connection with nature and with other humans. The other quote I wanted to pull out was, "Nature never wears a mean appearance." This is in chapter 1 of the essay, and I think this is why nature is such a big theme in farming simulators, is because nature can be so heavily stylized that it's not realistic, and yet never mean. Like even trees that maybe you cut down too much in that survival game and become scary and try and eat you.
Yeah. But the point is it's just being nature.
Yeah. The quote kind of goes on to say that the flowers, the animals, the mountains, they reflect the wisdom of his best hour as much as they delighted the simplicity of his childhood. So it's saying nature is reflecting back at you exactly what you're projecting into it.
Yeah.
And that 100% is agriculture.
Yes.
Right? And horticulture. That's saying that whatever you put into the earth is what the earth is going to give back to you. So if you put in a seed, great. If you put in seeds and set up for crossbreeding and hybridization to come, that could also happen. Nature's going to reflect that back at you. And nature is this beautiful, beautiful spirit to find out and explore and enjoy together on your own, but in a comforting way.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is a lot. Ella? Yeah. I really love these concepts, and I think it's super fun that though we, started off saying that this is super science-based, or it can be super science-based agricultural games, there's this not deeper.
Damn, it's also kind of philosophical, isn't it?
Yeah, I think nature and our understandings of nature and retreating into it can be really philosophical. We see this so much reflected in works of art and literature and film and video games, which I would argue, and I have argued in also other English courses, that video games can form part of literature. Same as interactive text and fiction.
Yeah, well, they all have their own narrative in it.
Yeah.
As well. Doesn't matter what style of game it is, it has some sort of narrative.
So I think it's super interesting to view it from this other lens, from a different literature course.
Yeah.
But also that it is still scientific, and there doesn't have to be, black and white distinctions between art and science, and they all kind of feed into this beautiful mess, and that's why we enjoy it and love it so much.
Yeah, the world is messy.
So that was a lot. That was a lot of things to touch on, all from farming simulators, which up until last week, I don't really think I'd given much thought beyond the thought of, that's pretty fun, and there's a lot of them.
I can't even remember how we came up with this idea. I think you were just like, we should talk about farming sims.
I said Animal Crossing and you said something about paleontology, and we just went boom.
That's funny though, that we went from like Animal Crossing, paleontology, agriculture,
and then me being like
nature
Emerson's
retreat.
universal being.
Yeah, okay. We got quite philosophical this episode, and I am all about it.
Yeah, how do you like your science? We like it with art and philosophy.
Well, clearly, otherwise we wouldn't have done a science and pop culture.
This is very, very true. Well, let's maybe jump into our individual sections, bring out this massive lens we've got back to a smaller, sharper focus.
Yes. So, hi, welcome back to Ideas with Isabel.
Ideas with Isabel, my favorite section on the podcast.
I want to talk a little bit more about Animal Crossing.
Please.
I think there's something special about Japanese video games in game development.
Tell me.
Remember Pokemon?
I remember Pokemon.
Remember the amazingness that was Pokemon, and I took a cybernetic lens at the end and talked about how it was encouraging these deep relationships between people and technology and the environment. And I think that Animal Crossing is also, I don't want to say doing a similar thing, but it is creating escapism.
Love.
And especially during the pandemic, it was a source of stress relief for a lot of people. It was used by families as a coping mechanism, both individually but also communally, because you can visit each other's islands and all of that. And so I think a lot of these Japanese games are creating a therapeutic style of gaming.
Wow.
Yeah. And it comes back to this sort of magical, childlike, innocent quality to them.
Really wholesome and full of wonder.
Yeah. And I'd be interested to know who developed Flower, because it seems like a similar
vibe
thing. Yeah. And I think it's tapping into something we as humans long for, in contrast to the big gaming houses and those big like action adventure games like GTA and Fortnite.
Which we don't necessarily long for, but I do think we yearn for a component farming simulation. I agree with this.
Yeah, and plus the fact that it's a game that has science in it, and science is not usually seen as a source of stress relief or
That's
escapism.
Very, very true.
And many other farming simulators too, it's not just Animal Crossing, have science in them with mechanics that simulate real world agriculture that you wouldn't usually associate with escapism, but that's what it's creating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to think about that for forever now.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So tell me about X-Men, Ella.
Yeah, well, we're on episode, 4 now? And you know what? Still talking about X-Men. Good, forever. I wanted to talk about how, through these farming simulating games that even if you don't think you like STEM, can make you care a bit more about science or a specific component, particularly for these things we've touched on today, agriculture or biology or paleontology or bug and fish identifying and collection. I wanted to talk about how one of the reasons that I first cared about X-Men First Class, specifically the character Charles Xavier, is because I really, really cared about biology and genetics at the time. And that is what this character is a professor of. And we see him accept his, do his dissertation, write his PhD at the very, very start of X-Men First Class. And yeah, this is really one of the things that initially drew me into the story, which I think is super funny because it's kind of like the opposite and a complete contrast to what we've been talking about of people enjoy the story and then they get the science drawn in. It was for me in X-Men First Class, the science drew me into liking the story and the characters, and then, caring about it to maybe a too much degree. Maybe I care about it too much. One of the things that really, really got me going was the genetic animation in the end credits of X-Men First Class. So the movie's finished. We've just seen this beautiful, beautiful piece of cinema and film history. And no, I will not be accepting any criticisms. I will actually, but please make them nice. And then you get kind of like this genetic animation in the end credits where you see like cells dividing and things changing, and it's kind of cool.
Did not know this.
Yeah, and it makes me equal parts excited and like happy to see that depicted, but also like a little bit irritated when there are inaccuracies in it.
Yeah, of course.
Because I care about it. But I just thought that was a really interesting idea that I could get brought into a fictional world because of science rather than fictional worlds bringing me into science.
Yeah, and I want to say it's interesting that they use that as a way of tying everything up rather than, I don't know what the opening credits are like. Did they do something similar in the opening credits?
I don't think there are opening credits.
Okay, so I just think that's a really interesting artistic choice to have the science animation at the end.
Yeah, well, I guess the whole idea of X-Men is, based on people who are different because of genetics. So it's a really, really good way to tie it all together.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the end that they don't go back to, just like action adventure, that they're like, well, wait, the science in quotations.
Yeah. Yeah, well, then it's also like, are they using it to tie altogether, or are they using it as like, oh yeah, by the way, science?
I think they are using it to tie it all the way together.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, the kind of the introduction that we get to Charles as a character is him. One of them is, his adopted sister, quote unquote, saying, "Oh, read me something that'll send me to sleep." And he's like, "I'm working on my thesis." She's like, "Yeah, good. That's pretty boring," essentially. And he reads that to her, and she falls asleep. And here's some inaccuracies in there that, as a now biological anthropologist, or having been trained in that area, that I find irritating. But the fact that that's one of the openings, I really like that you come full circle at the end and see it depicted in animation. I still think it's really cool to see and to visualize, and even if people don't necessarily know that that's what they're referring to, you kind of see like chromosomes split out and become cool, and kind of like a karyotype, which is great for nerds. If you don't understand it, I could understand may it just look like schools on a screen. But yeah, something cool to touch on and to think about nonetheless.
Awesome.
Yeah. Expert First Class is awesome.
I feel like I actually need to go rewatch that film because I think I've seen it once. And that's
movie night?
Ooh. Don't tempt me.
I'll tempt you.
I think we're going to wrap it up there.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So maybe some questions for our listeners. Let's bring it back to farming simulators again.
Yeah, right back to the start before Ella took us on all these tangents.
Why do you like, if you play them, why do you like farming simulators? Or maybe why don't you like them if you don't play them?
Yeah, and what about them draws you in? And especially if it draws you in continuously or draws you in across different farming simulators.
Yeah.
What's the thing that like connects them all that you just enjoy or that you like or you find cool?
And if science is a part of that, let us know too.
Yeah, and hit us up on all our socials at sci_burst, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok.
Yeah, you name it, we could be there. And if we're not there, tell us.
Stay nerdy.
Please stay nerdy.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you to ANU CPAS for their support and access to their podcast studio.